Hi, I'm Brian, or Fat Dad from Fat Dad's Woodshop. Raised panel doors are what we are going to build today, and I'm going to show you how this is done.
Fat Dad Woodshop.
A lot of people have seen raised panel doors on their kitchen counters. These actually are just more than decorative. This is a panel that's inside a wooden frame that goes all the way around, and it's actually loose inside this frame. And the idea is that you can have a large piece of wood in the center that is allowed to expand and contract inside that frame, and everything stays square so that your door doesn't get warped and sit in it.
You can see examples of raised panels on exterior doors, although most exterior doors are metal like this one, and they are made to look like they're wood in order to maintain that nostalgic look. But the fact of the matter is these are just decorative when they're in a metal stamp like this. They don't have the function of the old door.
Now, some of you may recognize this center panel, which is a chessboard that I made earlier. And this is going to be the center raised panel of my raised panel door, which is not actually going to be a door. It's going to be the top of a gaming box, but the construction is going to be the same. And as you can see, I've selected my frame for this raised panel, and it's going to be these pieces of ash. And the way that I'm going to make this is I'm going to use my router bit. Now, the bits that you need for your router bit table are actually specific to making raised panel doors. They come in different sizes, so you have to match the size of your bits to the thickness of the stock that you're using. This is 1/2 inch or about 12 millimeter thick stock, so that matches with this set right here. This is a 1/2 inch. That's how that's done. What this does is it cuts a tongue and a groove in the side of the frame. It cuts a groove in the side of the frame, and it puts tongues on the end. And then this bigger bit will actually cut around the outside edge of the raised panel to create a tongue on the edge of the panel that will slide into these grooves that go inside the frame. And it will make the whole thing look somewhat decorative and be very nice. Now, you can see that there are differences between these two sets. This is the 1/2 inch or the 12 millimeter set. Obviously, the tongue and the groove on here are going to be small, about 1/8 of an inch or about 3 millimeters wide. And there are only 2 bits on this one. The bit for cutting the tongue and the groove are on the same shaft with this bit. So you actually have to raise and lower the bit so that it matches up with the wood in the correct spot and makes the correct cut. The other set that I have here, this is a 3/4 or about an 18 millimeter set. And this obviously makes the raised panel. And then these are separated onto different bits. These make a 1/4 inch or about a 6 millimeter tongue and groove. And one makes the tongue, which is this one, and one makes the groove, which is this one. So you just have to know something about the bit that you buy, or the bits set that you buy. They usually come with a set of instructions. And then you just have to be very careful when you line them up. Before you get started, it is very important that you select your frame and your pieces to be bigger than you need them to be. The reason for that is when these things start cutting into the wood, they cut relatively easily when they go into the side of the grain, into the side of the board. If they start grabbing the end of the board, it tends to kick really hard, and that can actually cause a dangerous situation. You can get some pretty severe kickback when you work with the router table. So when you're cutting, you want this to go into the side and go almost the entire length, or even some all the way out on the other end. And if they are longer than you need, you can cut off the parts that aren't perfectly milled, and you will still have the right length. And then I will show you with waste blocks how to prevent those when you're cutting the tongues on the ends of the frames. So let's set up the router table and we'll get started. Now I always set up my groove cut first. The grooves I find are the easiest to cut, and they are going into this nice long side grain here so that you have this nice long sweep. Also, I use pieces that are wider than I need, so that if I'm going to cut this frame down smaller, I can do that after I do all this milling. That way I can keep my fingers away from the cut. You can see that this is not going to be one of my pieces for the frame. I always cut test pieces first to make sure everything is lining up, so I can line up those test pieces. And when I set up the groove, I always cut all of my grooves first, and then I set up for the tongue, and I make sure that the tongue cuts with my test pieces fit the grooves. So it takes a little bit of fiddling around, but it's worth the extra effort. And here is your groove, and obviously the tongue will be the exact same thing, just a match to this. Now, before I cut my tongue ends, they're going to be cut on the two shorter pieces, and I'm going to cut these two shorter pieces to just slightly longer than the total size of my panel. The reason is I want the panel to be able to move and expand and contract a little bit within these grooves. So I'm going to cut these to length, not exactly to the same length as my panel, but just about 1/8 of an inch total bigger. That'll give about a 1/16 of an inch clearance to go back and forth on that. And then I'm going to cut my tongue ends on the two ends of my shorter pieces. And then the longer pieces will be the length of the total after I rip everything down to size. Now I'm going to get the bit close to where I want it by matching it up to the scrap piece of groove that I already cut, because I want that to be about the same size, and I'm going to get it pretty close. So it should be very close, and then I'm going to cut at least probably 2 pieces of scrap to make sure that it matches up to the groove. As I hope you can see, these match up really well. Now, in order to reduce chip out, I've clamped my scrap piece with the tongue into the groove that I already made on my end piece. And now when I cut this, I'm not going to bung up that groove really bad with the tongue that I'm cutting on the end. Now for the final bit. This is a very large hunk of steel, so you want to set your router at the slowest speed possible. And you also want to take very light passes with this one, but you run the face of your panel against the bottom of the or the top of the router table. I actually have to put an auxiliary table on top of my router table, because the hole in the router table isn't big enough to accommodate this bit. So that's how big that thing is. But take several light passes. I would say 4 to 5 light passes before you end up at the full depth. And you'll have to sneak up on the fit for the tongue so that it fits into those grooves. The first dry fit. So the tongues can be glued into those channels at the corners, and the panel will be allowed to free float in the center, keeping the expansion and contraction of the panel from breaking the frame.
Pet Dad Woodshop.